This might be something that goes through the minds of the Chinese as they're looking at soybeans and Harley-Davidsons and wondering where to plant these retaliatory tariffs that they've talked about this morning but given us no timescale on. Surely, you know, they're very mindful of hurting Wisconsin, of hurting Kentucky, of hurting the places that Trump has a lot of support. And so, therefore, you wonder whether the way that this is playing with the base continues to the midterms if it starts to hurt.
Yeah. I mean, it's not just the Chinese that are very politically targeting, their retaliatory tariffs. The Europeans are doing the same, the Chinese, the Mexicans. The question is, will this bite eventually? And for the time being, the economy in the United States is doing very well. We're at 3.8% unemployment. So the overall concern about the tariffs biting isn't there yet. It's still very much, okay, yes, tax reform and tax cut has delivered. So until we really see an economic impact from the tariffs, I think this is not going to be a concern for the voters on the ground.
I was reading about trade talks that are planned between the United States and Japan later on this month. And this was a useful reminder to me that, what is the point of this tariff imposition on both sides? Is it that we get to the talking table? Is it that we get around a table and that tariff and trade conversations happen? Are you assuming that that is the end game here, Marianne, that that's where we get to between China and the United States, that we sit round a table and that we see a constructive conversation around trade taking place?
I mean, certainly in the Trump administration, that is the aim, to kind of use those as a pressure point to get other nations to the table to negotiate. The concern for me is that, Trump, to some extent, has very valid concerns with regards to Chinese intellectual property rights, for example, forced technology transfer, intellectual property theft. However, that really gets lost in this whole debate about tariffs on soybeans, tariffs on Harley-Davidson. So, again, also on confronting China, there is an opportunity for the United States and the European Union and other allies of the United States to work together and confront China. But at the moment, that isn't really happening, because what Trump is effectively doing is pushing the Europeans also against the wall by introducing those steel and aluminum tariffs, and very likely also imports of cars and automotive parts.
Who does the European Union want to work with here? Because the Chinese offer to work a lot with Europe on this. They want Europe to work with them. Maybe the Europeans feel pushed away, as you suggest, by the Trump administration. And yet I spoke to a trade expert from Mint Partners earlier on this week who was saying the Europeans really need to work with the US to try and tackle the other abuses by China.
Exactly. I mean, again, this is a lost opportunity of common ground to work together. There's also the opportunity for the European Union and the United States to potentially come to a wider trade agreement. Again, at the moment, we're seeing talks about having a very narrow agreement that just involves cars and automotives, for example, but that can't really happen. It has to be consistent with the WTO to cover substantially all trade. So again, if you wanted to look for the silver lining, this could segue into larger trade talks.
And that's what Angela Merkel was pointing to. She was suggesting that, yes, she'd be in favour of talks. German car makers were talking with the US ambassador to Germany yesterday. She'd be all in favour of that if it applies with the rules. And that's what she's talking about, isn't she? The European Union, because of WTO rules, can't just drop its 10% tariff on car imports because it would, from the US, because it would have to do so with other trading partners as well. And so Trump might want to have a conversation that's just about cars and just with Germany, but he has to talk all trade and he has to talk all Europe.
Exactly. That's exactly what it is.
But that's what we were that's what the whole transatlantic free trade deal was supposed to do.
Yes, and then you would get into very much of the same issues and stumbling blocks that we saw with TTIP, the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, that is in the freezer. I think the odds of that being out of the freezer anytime soon are slim. If it comes out, it would be very much under a different name. But it is helpful to look to TTIP in terms of what were the issues that the United States was demanding, what were the issues that the Europeans were demanding. And again, I do see room for a structural dialogue, especially when you look at services. For the European Union and for also the United States, trade is critically important when it comes to services. So there is room to address that. For the Trump administration right now, the focus is on trade and goods. But again, the future is with trade and services. So let's focus on that.
And that's not tariffs, that's about regulation half the time, isn't it?